Welcome to our program, The Labor Movement and the Fight for Housing Equity. This is really an intersection of two programs that we're working on here. One is a program that we've been working on for a better part of a year, a regular monthly discussion of the labor movement and some social movements. So we did the labor movement in Me Too, and the labor movement in Black Lives Matter, and the labor movement in environmentalism. And so this is, again, an extension of the boundaries of the labor movement, talking about the labor movement and housing issues. And then the other project is a collaboration that we're doing with ABC Realty, Sian Thomas and her team here on the east side. And that is an attempt to come to understand and address the housing gap, that is the gap between white home ownership and black home ownership here in Minnesota, and what that indicates about issues of justice and equity for all working people. So what we've been doing is assembling panels for this labor movement program. I'm going to introduce people in just a second, but I also want to mention that we will be continuing to work with ABC Realty and this project on the fight for housing justice, and we will be doing 3 movies in the month of July. We will show the documentary film Sold Out, made by TPT Channel 2. Then we will show the documentary film Jim Crow in the North, also made by TPT2. And then we will show Detroit 48202, which is a film about the impact of plant closings and deindustrialization in Detroit through the eyes of African Americans living in the city. And then in mid-August, we will have a wider, hopefully, community conversation about these issues. So a number of other organizations have been involved in helping us, John Slade and Micah, Jim Murchill and Dayton's Bluff Neighborhood Housing Services, Home Ownership Center, and of course, we have to give a shout out to the Cookie Cart, who have provided us with more cookies than any of us could possibly eat. So, fill your pockets. Jason here in the front row assures us that they freeze well, so make sure you take some cookies. So let me introduce the panel. So I'm going to start at one end and so we have Metric Giles, who is with the Martine, with the Community Stabilization Project, right? Largely in Frogtown or Metro-wide, right? Pardon my back. Dave Snyder from Jewish Community Action, Elizabeth Glidden from Minnesota Housing Partnership, formerly Minneapolis City Council, Chelsea Glaubitz from the Minneapolis Regional Labor Federation, Jigme Ugin from SEIU Healthcare, Logan Beery from IBEW 110, and Umberto Miselli from Setul. So we have both unions and community organizations represented here tonight. So we're going to start with Elizabeth, and I'm going to hand her the mic.
All right, well, thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Elizabeth Glidden, and I am with the Minnesota Housing Partnership. Let me just start with saying a couple words about what Minnesota Housing Partnership is. We are an organization that has, I think, a bad name because we actually do some work nationwide. But there's 3 buckets of our work. First is we do original research around housing issues, and that is work that's based in the state of Minnesota. Second, we do policy and advocacy. My title right now is the Policy Director for the Minnesota Housing Partnership. So we work on an agenda for the state legislature. We also do a little bit of federal work, and we also do some local and regional work on housing policy. The third thing that we do is we have staff that provides direct assistance to communities around housing issues, but that work is focused on rural communities and Native communities, and that's the work that actually is all around the country at this point in time. So what I think the reason I was asked to open a little bit is just maybe to say a few grounding things about housing. But, you know, as I was kind of looking back through what I got here, you know, it all really boils down to one very simple message, which is what we earn as workers does not pay the rent. That is the message, I gotta tell you. It is a message that has been said over and over and over again. You can say it a lot of different ways, you can slice it differently, and certainly that we know that the impacts are not even on our communities. So I think you started off kind of talking about impacts of race and racism, and we know that those impacts are real, and they mean that Black and brown people are facing the worst impacts of our housing emergency of any of the rest of us that are sitting here today. Just days ago, we are actually a partner to a national organization that I rely on a lot for information. It's called the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. And they put out a report every year that's called Out of Reach. And they just released this report. It just got some national attention. And our research folks at Minnesota Housing Partnership, we do a Minnesota version of this report. And this is a report that looks every year at what is the minimum wage that is applying across the country, and whether or not you can afford an efficiency, a 1-bedroom, or a 2-bedroom, or whatever it is based on that wage. Okay, again, not a secret, there is no county in the entire United States of America where you can afford a safe, decent, dignified place to live based on your minimum wage. And in most places you have to work double hours, like about 80 hours a week. 75 hours a week is actually a pretty typical amount to work to be able to afford that. As I was coming here today, I was looking on the Star Tribune, and this title caught my eye. It says, Minnesota Senators Boost Housing Allowance. So what this means is that at the state legislature, the folks who are our lawmakers, they get an allowance that allows them, because some of them have to travel, to be able to afford to live in the Twin Cities while they're working at the state legislature. Let me just tell you, I don't begrudge anyone the ability to be able to afford a decent place to live. But if our state senators are boosting their housing allowance, shouldn't they be boosting the housing investments that we're going to see across the state of Minnesota? I think that's the message that we need to bring. So I guess maybe I'll close with this, is that if you want data, and as we go through the conversation, I can certainly add in with more specifics. We have data. And I can tell you that in the state of Minnesota, there is a complete mismatch on what we build and what people need. What people need is housing that serves those at the lowest incomes. In technical terms, we talk about 30% AMI as being those with the lowest incomes, and that is it's a very low income. I'll just, it's different around the state, but that is where in the state of Minnesota last year, I think that the state built about 100 units in the entire state of Minnesota that served people at that income level. So we have a mismatch. We're not doing our job. Organizations like mine are recognizing that we can't do this work unless there is a movement that supports the work. And so that's why I think we're here looking at these organizations that really do the grassroots work, and what are they willing to do, what are their members, what are their partners saying needs to happen so that we can have safe, dignified places to live for those who need it in the state of Minnesota. Thank you.
I can talk a lot about this issue, so I'm going to start my timer so I don't go over. My name is Chelsea. I'm the president at the Minneapolis Regional Labor Federation of the AFL-CIO, and we are the umbrella organization for all of the unions in the West Metro. We've got our counterparts in St. Paul here. Vicki is part of the St. Paul Regional Labor Federation. And we're the arm of the labor movement that's closest to the community and closest to the ground. So it's these sort of regional bodies that are really feeling the fullest effect of what these crises are having on our members and in our communities, which is why I think you'll often see us in these spaces. And it's been so interesting over the last several year and a half now, how much Elizabeth has sort of become my partner in crime, because our two top priorities are coming together head on. The labor movement needs to address housing, and housing needs wages. So for housing to be successful, they need increased wages. So our work is becoming very, like I said, kind of partners in crime lately. So, at the within the labor movement, we spend a lot of time advocating on behalf of our members and trying to grow system-wide economic power. So as we look at the housing situation, it was really important for me that when we entered this, that it wasn't just about policy solutions and that we were either going to regulate or subsidize our way out of the housing crisis. What we needed across the labor movement are real economic strategies that grow power for workers. So our members who are impacted by housing really need to be at the center of that conversation. So that's what we've kind of been working on over the last year and a half. So housing has been a problem for a very long time. It's always been on our list of agenda items, housing. But things started to happen about 2 years ago in our area that really changed the course of our work. First of all, a few things is the governor created this task force that was going to address housing. We had a labor representative on there, and they created this giant map that has like 500 players. Like, these are the 500 most important entities to housing. And labor was like one teeny tiny little dot that just had to do with production. And I'm like, this is not representative of where the workers' movement relates to housing. So there's a problem here. Secondly, we were hearing a lot from our educators. Our educators in our communities were coming to us, and the first place that we were finding out about these flipping properties, like people would go into places in Richfield and Bloomington and flip these properties, the first place, before it ever even hit the news outlets, is the teachers were hearing about it, because they were hearing about it in the classroom and then bringing it to us. Secondly, there's been this massive rush for development and construction, particularly in the multi-unit housing industry. A lot of it market rate and high end throughout our region, particularly in Minneapolis and in the first ring suburbs. And because of that mad rush to build and to construct, the amount of exploitation that is happening in that industry is at paramount levels. We're talking about labor trafficking, children on job sites, things that should not be happening in a sort of like broader conversation that in order to build affordable housing, we need to drive down the wages of people who are building our affordable housing, which to Elizabeth's point is kind of backwards if you're actually going to think about addressing it. And so we have that. And then, 2 years ago, we were winning some things. We won the minimum wage in Minneapolis. You guys did it here in St. Paul. Contracts, like our union members who are organized were winning some wages in their contracts finally. But none of that is going anywhere because the cost of housing was outpacing anything that we were winning on those campaigns. And then also, internally, we were convening this committee that we called our Commission on Racial and Economic Justice, which was some of our key, Jim is in this committee, key stakeholders across the labor movement, talking about how does the labor movement be a leader on racial and economic justice issues, and clear in a way, their top issue was labor has to be doing something about housing. So all of this started happening about 2 years ago, and it became clear something has to give. So we started to convene stakeholders of unions, community partners, policy experts, impacted workers, our retiree committee, to really try and put a stake in the ground of like, what is labor's role in this housing crisis, and how do we stop being bystanders and actually be co-creators of what the future would be. And I want to remind you, this work was happening when we were about to get a ruling from the Supreme Court that Janus was going to make right to work the role, like the law of the land. We were 6 months out from the largest single gubernatorial race that was going to impact the future of unions everywhere. We have been on defense in the labor movement for so long that even bringing up this topic as an offensive strategy in amidst of one of our biggest crisis moments was something that people wanted, and it was an appetite that they had for. So the amount of folks who were engaging in this offensive conversation about what can the labor movement do to be on the offensive about an issue was so refreshing, and it was so important to me that to see that level of engagement, even amidst the immense pressure that our partners were under during that year and a half that we did this work in this convening. So we held our convening, and we came up with all kinds of findings and opportunities that I'll maybe go into later, depending on what direction people want the discussion to go. And then we passed a statewide resolution in the fall. And now we have a labor movement that's really starting to lean in a lot of various ways in trying to bring our capital and our influence to the game to help make change. So we're rewriting our questionnaires. You know, we're having meetings with elected officials. We're getting calls that we weren't getting 3 or 4 years ago about, hey, how is this policy going to impact your members? So we're really starting to lean in, and there's just so much on here about like enforcement. So one thing that's interesting too that we have as a labor movement, we have access to capital that a lot of other institutions don't have. Our union members' pension dollars that are in these funds can be used to help facilitate the development of affordable housing in our region. So these are the kind of things that we're looking at to the future as innovative strategies, working hand in hand with the actual workers and tenants and making sure that their voices are being risen, that their voices are the rising. And the actual work that we're going through right now, I'm not getting into very many specifics here, but we've had this Raising Wages campaign for 4 years. This housing campaign is our newer campaign. But over the last 6 months, it became crystal clear to us that these are not separate campaigns. So we're going through the process right now of convening the 2 stakeholder groups together under one wages and housing campaign. So as soon as that all develops, you'll be seeing more of that coming out of our shop. But it is true that housing and wages are inextricably linked. And I look forward to hearing more about what you all are interested in and what we might be able to add to that conversation.
Thank you, everyone that's here tonight. Tenant stability will lead to community stability. That is the theme of a community stabilization project. Why 51% of the renters, 51% of the households in St. Paul are renters. 80% of homeowners are Europeans. And we have a system that is concentrating on saying, how do we change that 20%? So if we have 80% of people, Europeans are homeowners, that means we have 80% of people of color either incarcerated, in transition, or renters. And my biggest task is moving renters beyond a second-class citizenship and having that voice. So I want to make sure that that's real clear, that renters do not have the political, social status as homeowners. The second thing I want to make clear here tonight is that, and this is our model that we use, the responsibility of doing good is to do no harm or the least harm. An example of that application, there was a milestone happening in Minneapolis. They was trying to improve the livability of renters in Minneapolis. So what happened? They paid the owner, property owner, $600,000 plus. And then we had another entity purchase those homes, and then they turn those homes over to the people who was renters as contract for deed. Wow, great. What happened to the renters? I thought we were trying to take care of renters. You know, nothing. It did no good for renters. If it did anything, it reestablished that if you want to be something in this system, you have to be a homeowner. So, once again, the responsibility of doing good is to do no harm and the least harm. And it made my work harder. What CSP is trying to do is say that we bring people to a place of stability and then to choice. Do we want to be homeowners or do we want to be renters? So, the one thing I don't want to do tonight is overwhelm, especially in this short time. So, one piece is, I'm kind of like overwhelmed and tired and hope that we can stop trying to find solutions for the cure of low-income people and people of color. Because every program we talk about is a program to help people of color or low income. Like, we are the problem. We don't address the system that is a systemic, intersectional system that has excluded people of color and people who are economically marginalized from the beginning, which is what the problem is. So if we're going to get to Chicago, let's start going east instead of keep going west. Right? So the other thing, we talk about affordable housing. I don't believe we can get to affordable housing. Affordable housing is like capitalism. This is what we have. Some people make a lot of money, some people make less money. Affordable housing is not something you can touch, but you can touch equitable housing. And so we need to stop using the language and the goal of trying to reach affordable housing. We need to have equitable housing, and under equitable housing, affordability would be one of those things. Accessibility and other values would be what it would be. This is the biggest push, is we have these people on this side of the room that we subsidize. And then we have these people on this side of the room that we invest in. Now, and that's what our system was built on, subsidizing those who do not have, and that's called sustaining. And we have been in a state of sustaining long enough. So we have to stop being subsidized and sustaining, and what we want is investment and reinvestment. And then when we get that, we can start having equitable, regenerative outcomes that is for all of us. So I'm saying these things without real big explanation behind it. Hopefully you're getting it. You understand it. This is kind of like off track to it, but you know, we have these communities that we keep policing. Now, at the state level, they're called peace officers. Now, I'm kind of saying these things because it's all intersectional, you know, and we have to stop working in silos. So I think we have to bring that down from the state office to our cities, municipalities, and that we start having peace officers. And that's what we have, because as for a person that comes to you out here, what do you want? You want someone to come out and police you, or want someone to keep the peace? What do you want? Peace. Peace. That's what we want, is peace. And so we have to name it, right? We have to name it. And the last thing probably doesn't relate, but it does relate. We have something called the Farm Bill. Now, why am I talking about the Farm Bill? Because we're talking about the labor movement, we're talking about housing, and what we eat under those, in that housing, and how we work and stay healthy, and our mental state of being. You know, all those things come under the Farm Bill, if you don't know it. Because you know, what we have been subjected to is
That's right.
Thank you. What we have been subjected to is secondhand food allowances under the WIC program, under the SNAP program. And you know who decides that, where that decision is made? Under the Farm Bill. So, you know, if we're gonna really start getting down to making the changes that we want, we had to take some steps back and we move beyond this colonial paradigm that we keep working under. And you know, and what people don't like to hear, that colonial paradigm, can someone tell me what that is?
White supremacy.
White supremacy. White supremacy. And we have to stop. So, and you know what? It's okay for those of you in the room who are still at the level of racism, you know, and or sexism and all that. You know, and that's where you begin. I will work with you there. But at the end of the day, we need to get to where the problem is coming from. It's a white supremacist system that is equal to capitalism, one and the same. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Logan Beery. I represent the IBW, Local 110, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. So we are the electrical workers that wire your houses and your buildings and street lights and anything that requires electricity goes through us pretty much. What our organization does really, mainly to close the housing gap for our members is by paying good wages or negotiating for good wages, fighting for good wages. And safe working conditions so that you can go to your homes. What we do in terms of equity is what we're starting to do now in the last handful of years is to open up affinity groups within our organization, trying to address some of that systemic racism that has been going on in some of the building trades organizations, to make sure that people of color, women, they feel like they're a part of the organization. And in terms of what I do is some community outreach in terms of getting to kids and talking to them about the building trades and how the building trades can really benefit them, how it can give them a good wage, can give them good working conditions, and how they can be self-sustaining. And really getting into the St. Paul schools. I'm from the east side of St. Paul, and so I have a real passion to push the IBW Local 110, which is St. Paul, towards some of these St. Paul schools, because we can see in education there's almost a complete abandonment of shop class, of automobile work, of all of these skilled work that really allows people to generate a higher wage. These good training programs. We visit with community or counselors, school counselors, and our organization and the painters were the only building trades organization talking to every single one of the school counselors in the entire state. And so we're trying to make a concerted effort to get to the kids, to get to where they are, to let them know that there are programs that aren't going to rack you with massive school debt. And then when you get out, and I'm not against college by any means or higher education, but there are programs where you can earn while you learn. And that's what our program really represents. In terms of what we do in the community, we work with Habitat for Humanity. We build houses across the Twin Cities for families who can't afford it's equitable housing. We do a lot of work with veterans, with the veteran community and building camps and some housing for veterans. Some of our affinity groups, it's the EWMC, it's Ethnic and Women's Minority Caucus. They do all sorts of really good stuff in lots of communities across the city. There's the Sisters of Solidarity through the IBW that is just really are doing good things across the city for trying to build solidarity. And Yeah, that's really, I don't have that much more to say. I think that's pretty straightforward about what we're trying to do is fight for higher wages. And I will just give you one story about equity, and it's kind of my story. My mother, at the age of 3 months, my biological father left the family. And I have 3 older brothers. And when he left, my mom had a job at the Little Oven and I think it was Baker Square, right, to try to get us through living. And through a government program, she got the ability to go through trade school. And through trade school, she got to becoming an electrician. And through that, she gained enough wages to put all of us through athletic programs. So I played hockey. It's really not, it's a really expensive and out of reach for most people, but because of the fact that my mom got involved with the trade, where she was able to raise enough money to put me into programs that I wanted to do, I wasn't a statistic, right? Because on the east side of St. Paul, with 3 older brothers and a single mother, you really could fall into a statistical category fast. So my mother's here, she's right there. She's an electrician, I'm very proud of her. And we're going to keep trying to reach across organizations to build the labor movement together, and that's all I have.
Gracias por la invitación. Mi nombre es Humberto Micelli. Soy miembro de CETUR. Qué bueno que me tocó al último porque voy a dilatar mucho porque hablo muy poco inglés.
Thank you. My name is Humberto Micelli. I'm a member of CETUR. I'm glad, I think I'm last, and I'm glad that I'm last because I'm going to be talking a lot. No, I
Muy bien,
Twice the time.
Sí, estamos bien. Bueno, entonces, ya estoy en pareja, ¿verdad? Pues yo soy miembro de CETUR. Vengo a decirles que la industria de la construcción es una de las más grandes que hay en los Estados Unidos.
So the construction industry, I'm from CETUR, and the construction industry is one of the biggest, right, in our country, right? The biggest, one of the biggest, it's not the biggest, one of the biggest in our country.
Y los que trabajamos en ella somos el espíritu que la mueve.
And we who work in that, we're the spirit that moves it.
Sin embargo, somos una de las comunidades más afectadas por el robo de salario.
And in spite of being the spirit of that, immigrants or folks like me are exploited and suffer a lot of wage theft.
Yo soy CETUR precisamente por eso. Yo sufrí en carne propia lo que es el robo de salario. No tenía dónde recurrir, no tenía dónde ir. Alguien me dijo, ve a CETUR, ahí van a ayudarte. Y así fue, y me quedé en CETUR.
I personally suffered like wage theft, and I didn't know where to go. Somebody said, go to CETUR, and I went to CETUR, they helped me, and that's where I've been.
¿Qué hacemos en CETUR, verdad? Tenemos una guerra abierta desde, podemos decir desde siempre, en contra del robo de salario, ya que así como nosotros nos preparamos para defendernos, también los patrones cada día desarrollan estrategias para poderse quedar con nuestros salarios.
So there's an open battle because every day we're on the defensive trying to defend ourselves from wage theft, but the bosses are always looking for different ways or different strategies where they can take our wages.
Porque, bueno, sentimos que la comunidad latina en lo que a mí respecta es la más vulnerable a esto. Pero analicemos un poquito más por qué.
So I think that the Latin community is one of the more vulnerable communities to this respect, but I want to ask why. I want to talk about why.
Una, por desconocimiento de sus derechos. Y dos, principalmente por miedo.
First, because people are unaware of their rights, and secondly, because people are afraid.
¿Por qué por miedo, verdad? Porque tienen miedo a represalias. Actualmente estamos viviendo un terrorismo de Estado con amenazas masivas de deportaciones.
So why afraid? Because people are afraid of reprisals, or people also, we're also living in a terror state, because, I mean, there are mass deportations happening across the country.
Sencillamente porque pues sabemos que personas con documentos, sin documentos, también han sido detenidas y han sido recluidas en esos centros que ellos tienen de detención.
If you can imagine, people who are documented and undocumented have been held at these detention centers.
Nosotros tratamos de concientizar a nuestra gente que no tenga miedo, que hay quien pueda responder por ellos. No solo les enseñamos sus derechos, sino también a defenderse, a ejercerlos. Y hemos aprendido una cosa: la Constitución política, la Carta Magna de los Estados Unidos de América, no discrimina.
So we've learned that, we raise awareness, and we also teach rights to our members, and we also show them how to defend themselves with those rights, become leaders in the community. And I just wanted to say real quick that the Constitution of the United States doesn't discriminate.
Aprendí también muchas cosas, he aprendido muchas cosas. Me decían cuando yo no sabía a dónde ir, ¿verdad? Cuando injustamente se me estaba reteniendo mi salario, yo no sabía a dónde ir, me decía: no te van a hacer caso, ¿sí? Ni te van a tomar en cuenta, sencillamente porque el capital aporta dinero para campañas políticas.
So, when I first started on my struggle to win back my wages, people were like telling me they're not going to listen to you. You're wasting your time, because these bosses, they put money into the system so that they can win.
Y de verdad que ya lo estoy creyendo. A pesar de mis argumentos, es decir, la demanda se llevó hasta la corte, ¿sí? Alegando yo que se me retribuyera por lo que yo honestamente ya había devengado, ya había trabajado.
And so I went and I fought for the wages that I had earned all the way to the court.
Y nunca la empresa demandada nunca se preocupó porque lo que yo hiciera o lo que yo dijera.
And the people who I was suing, they never worried about like what I was doing or what I was saying or what actions I was taking.
Lo que yo entendí es que no era la primera vez que lo hacía, y sobre todo que ya tenía experiencia cómo hacerlo.
So it wasn't the first time that they had done this, and not only that, but they also had experience on how to handle people like me, like who were suffering under wage theft.
Y sí lo comprobé porque por más que mis argumentos fueron sólidos, se demostró la retención injustificada del salario, se demostró las violaciones al contrato. De un 100% que yo reclamaba, la Corte autorizó se me retribuyera el equivalente a un 10%.
So it doesn't matter how solid my arguments were and what evidence I presented, I only got back about 10% of my full wage.
Bueno, de algo a nada, pues me quedo con algo, ¿verdad?
Well, at least I earned something. At least I got something back, right?
Pero esto pues nos ha ayudado, ¿verdad?, a llevar nuestra experiencia, a compartir con otros compañeros, a enseñarles cómo hemos hecho nosotros, ¿verdad? Sobre todo a no quedarse callados.
So this has taught us, how to keep fighting and how, even though in spite of all of this injustice, that we can't stay quiet.
Escuchaba yo a las personas que me antecedieron. Decía por allá el compañero que es muy difícil, ¿verdad?, que tengan una vivienda las personas de color.
Yeah, so I've been listening, and one of our panelists said that it's real hard for somebody who's a person of color to have housing, right?
Qué ironía, ¿verdad? Nosotros las construimos, me refiero a la comunidad hispana, y si nuestros hermanos de color no tienen acceso a ella, mucho menos nosotros.
And so how ironic is it that, as I said before, that we're the ones who are the spirit who are constructing these communities, and yet if people of color can't live in them, what's to say about us?
Bueno, ya para terminar, quiero decirles que el eslogan dice, hagamos grande América otra vez.
So just to wrap up, there's a slogan that we all know, like, make America great again.
Yo pienso que están muy equivocados. América siempre ha sido grande.
I think they're wrong. America has always been great.
Por la diversidad de blancos, negros, rojos, amarillos, café, del color que le pongan, porque con su trabajo y esfuerzo han hecho grande, rica y poderosa a esta nación.
Because of the diversity, because of blacks, because of whites, because of reds, because of Asians, because of browns, because of that unity together, we have made a great nation.
Gracias por su
Thank
atención.
Good evening. Thank you, Peter, for having this. Really, really enlightening. So educational sitting here. My name is Jigme. I'm with SCI Healthcare Minnesota. Before I talk about SCIU, I'm also a Tibetan refugee. My country was colonialized. So I know the value of land and property. I've never been to my country. I can't go back. And the housing crisis here is no different from what's happening in our country. It's a colonizer's mentality, like the brother said, and we're living it every day. SCI Healthcare Minnesota, we've got about 35,000 healthcare workers across the state of Minnesota. As units, so what I did was I tried to jot some notes here and try to stay as scripted as possible so that I can finish on time. So what's going on is racial justice, housing advocates, community groups have been leading the fight on housing and affordable housing in the recent years. Unions have sort of been slow joining this struggle. But historically, unions have played a huge role in advancing affordable housing in cities with significant union membership. In addition, unions were involved in a variety of ongoing efforts to fund and support affordable housing. So the Amalgamated Clothing Workers and the International Ladies Garment Workers Union in New York developed a co-op housing unit for their members in the 1920s. Our brother's own union, IBEW, built upon that model, and in the late 40s, IBEW developed about 38 buildings with roughly 2,500 units for its members. In the 1950s, 19 different unions alongside community organizations created the United Housing Foundation, building tens and thousands of co-op housing units. And even recently, folks remember the big Chicago Teachers Union? When they were negotiating, one of the proposals on their table was for the city's Board of Education to support rent control efforts and ensure that the city enacts the real estate transfer tax, a corporate head tax, and a millionaire's tax to fund more affordable housing. That was on the table. Now, building more houses, like everyone's been saying here, is a pro-union position. All too often, workers, our members whose wages are stagnant, are forced out of their own communities and into sometimes hour-long drives from work. We've seen this. We've got a lot of members here in St. Paul or Minneapolis who live in Maple Grove, Brooklands, right? Leading to increased costs in transportation, decline in mental and physical health, and of course the worsening of the traffic congestion, which leads to bad air pollution. It is also important to recognize that the local zoning has been a critical tool in promoting racial segregation in housing. Often when I go out, people say, "You're from Minnesota. We hear it's one of the healthiest states in the country." I often hear that. And I say, it's true, very true, but if you're white. And on top of that, a lot of our members who've just come out of school are crushed with the student debts, which leaves them absolutely indisposable in their income to pay for mortgage. Meanwhile, we as unions collectively have been giving raises. The brothers said we've been giving raises to a lot of our members, but it is not at par with the cost of living or with the ballooning housing cost. Last year, as a union, SCIU, we moved a resolution to support increased housing density in bigger cities like I talked about in Minneapolis or St. Paul. We supported a proposal in Minneapolis when Elizabeth was one of the city council members to legalize the fourplex dwelling citywide. But at the same time, we were opposing, not just here, but down in Rochester, where we have a CURE, Communities United for Reform and Empowerment. I'll pause a little bit to tell you the story. As a healthcare worker, our main fight has been healthcare, affordable healthcare for all. But in recent times, the number one fight for my members is housing. For healthcare workers, housing has been the top priority. And what we've been doing as a union is we've been also opposing local governments using their zoning authority to limit housing density and the number of new houses units that can be built that increases the cost of housing. As a union, we've taken positions that until the cities make it legal to build homes for everyone who can live in, our members will suffer higher housing costs, lost time with their families, I might add that, and the worsening racial segregation. We talked about coming up with some of the solutions, and I was like, here's something that I think coming out of what the teachers did in Chicago was how do we advance housing justice as unions? What if unions start bargaining campaigns that expose the key role that employers play in making housing unaffordable, right? And then identify ways that they can contribute to creating affordable housing. There's a few ways to go about this. As unions, we must establish that the employer's expansion is eliminating affordable housing based on whether it's the pension plan, like Chelsea talked about, or if it's investing in banks, private equity firms, etc., that are driving and making housing unaffordable. So what kind of business are these employers doing? And whether the employer's board members are involved in business activities that lead to displacement and higher rent. Right? Because like we talk about, as union movement, we take pride and say, our members believe in the cradle to grave. They're not just clock in, clock out. Once they are members, they are our members for life. But then we forget about what happens when they go out from their jobs back to the communities? Right? What kind of responsibility as a movement that we used to do back in the early 20s and the 30s, taking care of union members, not just at the workplace, not just talking about the overtime, the wages, but also the condition of living, right? Healthy communities. So I hope that as unions, as part of the bargaining unit, we can demand that the employers stop investing and partnering with private equity firms that are not just destroying jobs, but making housing unaffordable. So that's one of the solutions. So hopefully we can come with a ton when you leave from here, and we learn as a movement too. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Dave Snyder with Jewish Community Action. It's really great to be here. Just my gratitude to Peter and everybody who was involved in creating this space. I'm embarrassed to say it's my first time here and want to come back and hold meetings here and campaign planning and everything. I've been a student labor activist and a union organizer for about 15 years, and then another 10 years as a housing and community reinvestment organizer. So I've kind of been on both sides of this, and excited to share just a couple of thoughts, and then happy to expand on them. First, an overarching point, which has kind of been made in different forms. I think a lot of the unions here, and more unions get this important lesson that Jigme was just talking about, that we're trying to organize the whole worker. If you're organizing the whole worker, then you care about what happens at work, and you care about what happens at home. And so our strongest partners, as a faith-based organization, our strongest partners are unions that get that. And for us, the challenge is, as community and faith-based housing advocates, we need to understand, and we're trying to get all of our partners and our members and our clergy and everybody to understand that whether you're a tenant or a homeowner, especially if you're a tenant, there's a power relationship here. It's not just that we need to build more of something or subsidize something. There's a power relationship, and we need to build power with the people that are being most marginalized or exploited or oppressed. And I've done work with homeowners who are being oppressed by banks, and so figuring out which banks now are either doing a lot of predatory lending, or are redlining neighborhoods, or are investing in displacing tenants and investing in developers that buy apartment buildings and then flip them. That's one of our campaigns right now. So that's where we recognize that there's a power relationship between homeowners and banks and developers. And then especially for tenants, when we recognize that there's a power relationship with their landlords and developers, then we can really clarify that our role is not just to support building more stuff. Our role is to support building power with people that are being marginalized in the society, which for us, that's a lesson that we take seriously as Jews, as progressive Jews. So that's one important overarching point. Really quickly, what JCA is up to right now, we've done a lot of work in the West Metro, and we're now, in the next month, going to bring somebody on staff that's dedicated to the East Metro. So that means we get to have more meetings out here and cause more trouble out here. But we've been working, especially in the suburbs, where we have a lot of members, and they may be concerned about housing, but there's not a lot of organizing going on in the West Metro suburbs. And so we've partnered with social service agencies and churches and tenant organizations and immigrant-led organizations through the Suburban Hennepin Housing Coalition to challenge displacement, to try to move tenant protection ordinances and affordable housing ordinances through city councils in the West Metro suburbs. So coming to the East Metro and working with our members in St. Paul and the East Metro, we know it may look different, but we want to make ourselves available to learn and figure out how do we join in what's going on here. Then I mentioned the banking work that we're doing. Minnesota Housing Partnership is a really strong research partner there, an advocacy partner in figuring out who are the developers that the tenants' rights organizations are saying like are doing the worst job and doing the most displacement of tenants, and then where are they getting their financing? And we're drawing on campaigns in California and New York that then had communities put pressure on those banks to change their lending criteria, actually changed their underwriting criteria, so they were not doing as much displacement financing. That's the term that they created that we want to use too, displacement financing. So that's the banking work. Last point, and then I'm done. I think to add to what Jigme was saying about some solutions, we have some small solutions. This summer and into the fall, we're having all of our West Metro suburban teams do a whole bunch of apartment door knocks. And so, you know, a very basic thing we can do if we recognize that we want to build power with tenants, number one, we're trying to put tenants' voices and tenants at the center of the organizing process. And number two, we want to start asking about workplace issues. So if we're going to talk to thousands of tenants in the West Metro and inner ring suburbs, we want to ask them not only what are your issues as a tenant, but also do you have any issues at work, where you work? And then we can share that information with our labor movement partners. I can say more. I think the last thing I'll just say is we're really interested in partnering with the labor movement and with our fellow tenants' rights organizations to get in front of audiences of union members and to work with the labor movement to figure out of the really big apartment buildings in the Twin Cities that are older apartment buildings that are really at risk of being bought and flipped. Which of those apartment buildings have a density of union members? And can we try to get ahead of what's coming by convening those union members and having our tenants' rights organizing partners come in and do some workshops on knowing your rights as a tenant, so that the next time one of these buildings gets a notice, the tenants get a notice, you know, you got 30 days to move out, like they just did in Bloomington last year, like they did in Richfield, and they're all over. We're actually more ready than before to fight back. Thanks.
Before we go to the audience, is there anything that any of you want to say in response to what you've heard others say?
You know, I've got a mic, and I've got a question maybe. I suppose it could be for Metric, or it could be for some of the labor partners. So I'm looking at a chart right now. We do this work where we look at every county and we say, what are the jobs that are the most in-demand jobs? And can you afford the rent with those jobs? So in Ramsey County, the most in-demand jobs are retail sales, personal care aide, registered nurse, food prep and serving, food service supervisor, and then we have the fast-growing jobs of home health aide, personal care aide, and physical therapist. The only two jobs that pay that rent are registered nurse and physical therapist. So to me that says these are either organizing partners or prospects who right now cannot afford the rent. And so how is this affecting what our partners in the labor movement are seeing as what's going to be a priority? I mean, because I see a lot of organizing starting to happen at the local level that has labor partnerships, but I'm not seeing that rise up to the state level where I feel like choices are harder about where you're going to put your energy. Just to put that out there.
I want to do a shout out to some of our union partners who are starting to think more creatively, because if we could organize every one of those people into a union today, we would. And unions have been more popular in the history of public opinion than they ever have been since we started recording public opinion about unions. So the desire for higher paying jobs within these industries is there, but there is something about our system and our process and our barriers that are just not being overcome. So we have some really brave workers that are in the labor movement, adjacent to the labor movement, in and out of the labor movement, that are really trying to grapple with that question of how do we get a broader workforce to be, have more collective bargaining power, whether that's through, we would love if it was through a collective bargaining agreement, but can we raise, we're passing minimum wages, we're looking within specific industries about how can we provide more worker protections. But I want to talk about our worker centers, and Saytool is one of them, and you've heard about some of the great work that they're doing with retail janitor and construction. But we also have some partners out there doing work in the restaurant industry being one of the fastest growing. Can we get worker co-ops together where those workers have their voice being heard? Can we start with like wage boards, and then can that inspire some sort of like contract that goes across all restaurants, and then all of a sudden they're all organized? Like, these aren't easy questions, but we do have this sort of worker co-op mentality that's very adjacent to the labor movement that we're trying to make sure that they can be successful outside of the confines of the typical labor movement. And that's not going to be an overnight endeavor, but those partners have been at the table of these discussions because they are the future of the labor movement, hopefully. So we are hearing from them about how are you going to get empowered through this process?
So when SCIU first came out with 15 an hour, everyone laughed at us. And there was a joke. Nobody believed us. The movement didn't believe us. And basically, at that point, when it went national, I remember the first strike by the fast food workers in New York, people were still, even our own members that we represented within SCIU said, how is someone flipping burgers getting $15 and I can't get that? So the whole education of raising the base, that discussion happened. And we're in a different level of 15 today. I've heard more people say we need 20 at this point, right? And why not? Right? And to talk about Elizabeth's question, we represent the PCS, the home care workers. They are the most invisible workforce in the healthcare industry. Underpaid, invisible. For the first time, after they joined the union, they got overtime, vacation. We made national news when one of our members bought a pair of shoes. Right? They're still making $13. We're still fighting. They're still not at 15. The concept that nonprofit hospitals in this state have CEOs that make millions. Workers in that same hospital are making less than $13. That's the fright, right? Hospitals that create like cities. When you walk in a hospital, you do not see the housekeepers. These are mostly immigrants, single moms, low income. They're down in the basement, right? And this is how the hierarchy is created. So when we're negotiating, this is what the hospital sees. The concept of housing that we talked about with our members is like, there's a more universal cry of one job is enough, right? The American dream, the farce, the joke or the concept of American dream was just created to create that class and that class war. I keep hearing about the white picket fences in this country, right? And how like one spouse would work and they would take a vacation. That was the concept of the big old American dream that was sold. We have members who are working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, right? Back to back. And yet cannot afford to get the rent, right? We have members who are choosing between electricity and the food on the table versus the rent that they pay. And they have to wake up in the morning and take care of people, right? So humanizing of that story and our allies as labor, we are trying to learn a lot from our advocates, housing advocates, but like we've been also saying that we are able to bring the stories, we are able to bring those faces and people to you, right? Guide us, educate us, and hopefully, I mean, in this country, people doing one job should be able to afford a house, food, send their kids to school, healthcare. I think the least human right thing to do.
Why don't we, Metric, and then we'll go for questions. Go ahead.
When I was younger, I didn't really understand that the responsibility I had was not to have people agree with me, but to be able to provide a message that could be received. I am a union worker. I'm an athlete in the union, and I'm a union steward. So, so I understand the union and the power of unions. I will also say unions are the most racist organizations around. And as an African that I was enslaved, I did all the work in the world that I wanted. That was not a problem. So it's kind of like, yes, we can start at A, and then we want to get to C and D and E, but we forget about B. And B is to erase the standards that we're working under from a systemic level. And and if you heard me talking 5 months later, I'll probably be saying the same thing, because the same things is happening. I was giving my grandson a ride to school, summer school. And I'm like, so what subject are you going for? And it's history. He just doesn't like history. And I'm like, but history for us, especially for people of color, history is very important, because history is something that was taken away from us. The Emancipation Proclamation said that the slaves was emancipated, and forever after we became descendants of slaves. I had professors and anyone else saying that. No, I don't have to be a genius. If you tell me your ethnicity, I can tell you where you came from. But if I tell you that I'm a descendant of slaves, there is no such thing as slave land. No. So if there was the emancipations of the Africans, we might be in a different place. But that did not happen. But going back to my grandson with the history, I said, will you ask your teacher something for me? And because first I said, well, what do you talk about? Medieval, World War II, and he said something else. I said, World War II, what do you know about World War II? And I said, well, you know who we were fighting against? And he said, the Germans and the Japanese. And I said, and the Italians too. I said, so ask your teacher for me. We had 3 main countries we were fighting against. Why did we only lock up the Japanese? Why did we only lock up the Japanese? Why are we still locking up the Japanese and every other people? My brother taught me this. We was in a meeting and someone referred to stakeholders. I'm really into the language. That language will define our actions. And we're really stuck in colonial language. He said, well, I prefer for us not to use the word stakeholders. He said, do you know what the Homestead Act? Do people know about the Homestead Act? Yeah. The Homestead Act, you had all these white men on the line with stakes in their hand. And they went to take this free land that was free, that actually happened to be lands that belonged to all the indigenous people. And that was probably maybe not the first official act, but where we can just really say stakeholders, and that we're still staking people, So this domination of land and people, that's about labor. It's about homes. It's about our whole livelihood and quality of life. So, when we're having these discussions, and these discussions are grounded in the foundation of what is causing all the barriers and disparities, yeah, I go along with them because, I can't do it alone. We have to do it together. But sooner or later, I hope we get to the place of saying, well, let's go back to B and work on B so we can get to an outcome that will work for all of us.
I'm sorry, I just butted right in, but I have to get out of here before it gets dark. But I am a senior activist and we belong to a retiree union. But my question is, I've heard a lot about the issues, but I haven't heard anything about the solutions. And I'm wondering why no one has mentioned anything about seniors, because seniors have a great deal of housing. And we don't want that great deal of housing. We'd just as soon be out of it. but we can't afford to leave because somebody is building some really fancy senior housing. And that's, I don't know if they're union workers or not, but the only people who can move into those places are the people who have the how do we call it, MIC houses where they can afford that. And so that means the millennials with all the student debt and all the other persons of color will never be able to buy those places. They're hundreds of thousands of dollars. So seniors have to be part of the solution, and I'd like to know what kind of data you have on how many seniors own housing, and if you're the housing person, how you can help seniors figure out a way to get out of their medium houses so that other people can buy them. It's a serious problem. There's houses out there. And first of all, I'm going to say the seniors no longer use the word affordable. That's a bad word. I would not recommend anybody use that anymore. So I thank you. I appreciate it.
I have an answer for you. And I'm a real estate agent. I'm a big advocate for equitable housing. Thank you for that term. And the baby boomers are fighting with the millennials right now for the same house, pretty much, or they're staying in their houses and not going to the giant senior housing that's being built. Oh, there, can you hear me? Okay. And so there is a solution, and it's in the form of making municipalities zone for different things that are not McMansions and that are smaller. The first ring burbs after World War II, like our great-grandparents had part of this problem figured out. It's called the 1950s cracker boxes. Insulate them, make them affordable, but McMansions are not affordable, and so a lot of people are fighting over that entry-level house at $285 grand as a median price. And there's your other options are your senior level, or for millennials, it's your high rises or $1,500 a month.
Oh,
so
that's cheap.
yeah, that is so yeah, that's one solution is to push back on the municipalities that are allowing these giant mansions to be built in the first place and not allowing anything else to be built. But
you know that you're fighting the state of Minnesota made a policy and some legislation that wants to keep seniors in their homes. And so they're providing a whole lot of money to seniors to be able to stay in their homes, and they really don't want to necessarily be there. They'd like to get out. But if they're getting all these services, that's where some of your government money is going. It's fighting unions, actually. It's complicated, isn't it?
I was just gonna say, our retirees are one of the groups that has been actively talking about this. The senior population is the fastest growing homeless population in the state in terms of being forced out of their homes, and they're on fixed incomes, and so they have a lack of choice. And I really appreciate you bringing up choice earlier, because I think that's key to a lot of this. So we should have not just like access to a home, but like a home with dignity and a choice, and our seniors have a unique perspective on that.
I was just going to say, I don't know that in some ways the issues seniors face are unique, other than we need to pay attention that there are a lot of seniors, there are many seniors on fixed income, and you're right. The problem is there isn't a place that is affordable other than the big home that you have that you also can't afford the repairs to make safe and dignified. So that's kind of the message that we see in the metro, but it's also the message that we see all across the state. Red Wing, Minnesota, it's the same message. I was just talking to their housing director there. Seniors are in all of the single-family homes. They want to leave. They do not have a place to go to. That is either a smaller home or an apartment. Many of them would prefer to rent. So we're not solving that unless we have more investment and address some of the zoning issues or other barriers and exclusions to making sure you're able to either build smaller or have affordable.
yeah, 'cause you can't.
And I know I'm actually paying attention, but but that word just came out again. I appreciate the narrative change that people are putting out there about kind of what's the language we use that's important.
I'll defer to her, she'll defer to me.
Oh, no.
Okay, we also have,
What? I have a question.
okay.
Why is it in our high schools, we can, our students can choose a college path, or they can choose the military, because the military is there, but the unions are not? Why aren't the unions in our high schools as an option for our students, like the military is and the college path?
Peter would answer.
Yeah, I mean, like Chelsea said, we've been systematically removed too as a movement, right? In the 40s, 50s, labor movement was really strong. And then what the government did was build laws, rules against it. And that at that point, workers could shut down the country, right? This country was shut down by workers. Corporations, and what happened was at that point, there were so many laws, the NLRB was created, NLRA was created, so all these laws stacked against unions, and they stayed. Meantime, these corporations had a free reign, right? And there was nothing to hold them back. That's why the wages went down. The unions, we're still fighting that. So it's been like more and more like, kind of like the crushing and pulling down of the movement.
And the corporate mentality that the only way that you can be successful in school, sorry.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, when I'm at schools talking to kids and then their parents are there, you can see the parents are kind of uncomfortable with trying to even steer their children towards a trade. It's like, yeah, yeah, that's involved. So there's like this negative thinking of, that's across the country, that's if I'm in trades, I'm less, or that dirty construction worker, or you know, and you kind of get that sense while you're talking with people. So not only was it built into the system, but it's built into the brain too, right? So now when I'm trying to have a conversation about, you know, this is a earn while you learn. You're not going to get racked with student debt and then try to get a home, and now you have debt on top of debt, and you need a car. Yeah.
You're not going to get invited back to that school.
No. And it's kind of funny. It does depend too on the area. I mean, there are areas that are really open. We've made partnerships with Humboldt High School that are really partnering with the building trades. There's a construction career pathways organization that's doing a lot of work to try to get in to talk to elementary level children, get them out in the summer to wire up ice fishing shacks, just to frame up a wall and put some wires in it to run it to a solar panel, just to get them to do it once in a while, just to be, you know, exposed to that, to see if they like it, because obviously higher education is so unaffordable that it forces this loan process where you got a loan on top of a loan, then I got to get to work, so I got to get a car loan on top of another loan. And these programs actually, and this is really simple, we're just stating that you can make a good living, provide. I have 3 kids of my own on the east side. I am a single income, my wife stays home with the kids, and we're tight, but we make do on a union salary with good wages, pension program, setting people up for 401k or Roth IRA. We try to educate our members on this thinking on later down the road. So it's there, but it's a work in progress, and maybe for a long time that we kind of have abandoned it as well because of the fact that we're constantly being reactive, and we have to fight the battles that we're fighting here and now. We can't think about some of these proactive steps we can get to get people to thinking positively about unions. right? We're constantly fighting right to work. We're constantly fighting Davis-Bacon. We're constantly fighting all these legislation that hurts unions. We don't take the necessary steps to build a proactive union that gets out and talks to its members about the benefits of even being in a union. So, yeah, that's kind of...
Can I take a pause here and do a little reflection? We talked about the housing crisis. We talked about inequity. But also, like, there are little victories that are happening. I think it's really important to highlight some of the victories and, like, really feel good that there is a fight that can be achievable, right? I used to live in Richfield. I lived in Richfield for 14 and a half years. And I moved out of Richfield because of what happened to the residents at Crossroads, the largest displacement of workers in the Twin Cities. It was atrocious. Low-income people of color, our members, displaced, right? And then what happened, I mean, I think it'll make sense for the people who actually fought this, folks like Dave, on victory in Richfield.
Oh, sure.
I think it just helps kind of like...
Sure, real quick. So after the Richfield displacement at Crossroads, it was actually the schools, it was the superintendent of Richfield Schools that was hearing from teachers that it was going to happen again at Seasons Park Apartments. And so they got word to City Council member Maria Regan Gonzalez, and she convened local troublemakers and activists and said, we got to hold up this sale and put some pressure on the owner of the building to not sell it to a developer who's going to flip it and displace everybody. And they were actually successful. They got the sale held up. They got a nonprofit developer to come in and match the offer. They got the owner of the building to agree to sell it to the nonprofit developer. So they maintained affordability. Now, there's still issues with the nonprofit developer, like, yes, it's not perfect, but all those folks were not displaced. And so, yeah, that's a victory. And as I said, if we figure out how to get ahead of the curve the next time, the next big displacement is coming down the pipeline, then we can even push it further towards cooperative ownership by tenants and et cetera, et cetera. So thanks, JP.
I want to second where Metric is going with some of his comments and some of his tactics. Unless we address white supremacy, challenging and smashing it, because one part of the housing problem is redlining. It's NIMBYism, not in my backyard. Even in liberal communities up in San Francisco and Venice, California, you've got people want to build some equitable housing. That's one of the issues. So unless we're talking about that, and hopefully that's a forefront, people need to understand that. I come from a union background. My father would not have been a union worker as a Mexican because he was Mexican. But because of World War II, that's when they need us, they bring us in. So there is a history about that. And I understand the union can move and exchange. I'm a union person myself. One question I do have, and the sister brought it up, she mentioned that some of these buildings are being built by union construction. These massive apartments that are going to be at market or more. And I get that unions have been decimated in the last, 20, 30 years, et cetera, et cetera. So I know the struggle my own people as a union member would have. So how do the construction unions, the electricians who put the wiring in the buildings, how can you help the folks that he represents? I'm SEIU 721 from Los Angeles. So how do you get together to try to push these developers? Or can we even do that as construction unions, as IBEW? Is there kind of leverage? So I could go on and on, but anyway, that's my concern. I know it's a dilemma.
I think part of what we can do is work with organizations like Chelsea's and the MRLRF and the St. Paul Regional Labor Federation, and try to get together and really stop the separation, or even just get together. And we're doing things that they're trying to build solidarity with the public sector and private sector unions, and the RLF, the regional labor federations, are really doing a really good job. So maybe you can answer that better.
I do want to just acknowledge what I'm hearing about the institutional racism within the labor movement. That is a very real thing. It's a true diagnosis. It's something that many of us are reckoning with and trying to get very real about in our capacity in these organizations that have as long as the history of this nation, as long as the history of this union, we have, as the union movement, we have been a part of that. We have been bystanders. We, at the very least, at the very worst, we've been co-conspirators. So I do want to just acknowledge that we are hearing that, and that is a real thing that is at the forefront of a lot of our thoughts and works and plans of the future. But I don't have I can't wave a magic wand at this moment, but I want to acknowledge it. Two is, it's been really amazing watching workers, particularly with SAGTOOL, who do not have, and undocumented workers do not have a pathway into a unionized construction career right now. However, given that systemic barrier, the partnership that is developed between the Worker Center and these brave workers and the building trades, the unionized arm of the building trades, in understanding their shared self-interest, that they need each other to be successful is going to raise the bar, has been a really inspiring moment for a young person to be in this moment, because 5-6 years ago that seemed like something that could have been very impossible, especially when you think about the rhetoric of what's happening with immigration in our country, but to see the work of people really coming together to invest in their shared destiny, because it's the unionized building construction trades that can help lift the bar for all of the workers, and the unionized construction trade industry knows that they need to do that in order so that they can continue to be competitive as well. So what used to be a somewhat adversarial position has now really blossomed into something where the two communities are working together, and I hope someday it means that all of those construction workers that are putting up all those little single-family houses in the suburbs and those multi-unit family houses in those multi-unit family are all part of the official union family. But it gives me hope that these kind of things can happen.
El capital se protege perfectamente bien, ¿sí? Las uniones no pueden llegar hacia el capital, hacia el desarrollador, porque la ley se los prohíbe. Pero nosotros los trabajadores sí podemos llegar a ellos. Y nosotros en CETUR, junto con nuestros aliados, estuvimos impugnando porque se pasara una ley para tratar de frenar el robo de salario.
So there are developers. So it's hard because of the laws that were just spoken of. It's hard for unions to go against developers, but worker centers, because they're not governed under the same laws, are able to approach developers so that we can put pressure on them, and that's what we and our worker center, SAGTOOL, have been doing.
Entonces, en cada oportunidad en el Capitolio donde nos manifestábamos, los empezamos a exhibir. Vimos que desarrolladores que más problemas tenían con robos de salario y empezamos a exhibirlo. Y de esa manera lo obligamos a que nos buscara y se sentara a dialogar con nosotros.
So we started doing manifestations at the Capitol, and anywhere where we could. We just started making noise. And we put pressure, we've been putting pressure on particular developers we can't name right now, but they sat down with us and we are currently in talks with them.
Indiscutiblemente los trabajadores luchamos con dos armas, la razón y el derecho. Y desgraciadamente también la ley por la que nosotros estuvimos empujando junto con nuestros aliados entra en vigor apenas este 1 de agosto. Lo que ha sucedido el fenómeno de que han habido mucho más trabajo en sector, han llegado muchísimas más denuncias de trabajadores gracias al trabajo que han hecho nuestros organizadores.
So, sorry, I kind of missed a little the first part of that, but the last part, he said that, you know, Setul, because of the work of the organizers and what Setul has done, like in other parts of the city, more and more people are coming to Setul regarding wage theft, and so it's an epidemic.
La ley castiga desde luego el robo como un delito, pero no lo clasificaba, por decir así, como un crimen. Nosotros pedimos eso, que se considerara un crimen, porque es un crimen quedarse con el salario de lo que yo ya trabajé.
And so, you know, many of you know that August 1st, I think there's going to be a law where it's going to be a felony now. I think it goes into effect August 1st, where it's a felony if you steal wages. And that's what we wanted, because the idea is, and he didn't say this, but the idea is that if I go into a store and I steal something, or I steal something from a cashier, I steal cash from the cashier, that's a felony. I can go to jail for that. So why is it when somebody steals my wages, it's not a felony? So we're happy that that's going to go away.
Ley más severa que sancione, castigue fuertemente a quien haga esta práctica del robo de salario. No solo corporal, sino económicamente, una sanción fuerte, porque eso les duele que les toque en el bolsillo. Pensamos que después de este 1 de agosto que entra en vigor esta ley, podamos parar bastante esto que aqueja mucho a nuestra comunidad.
So, you know, we weren't just, you know, looking for something that was corporal, something where somebody was just put into jail, but, you know, where it really hurts, you know, their pockets, because that's usually where, you know, people are hurt. And we can see, you know, that a lot of times, like, people who are rich, they don't even get punished, they don't even get sent to jail. So if we can at least, you know, put fines on them, so we can hurt them in those ways, I think it will help us. Thank you.
Can you talk about what wage theft actually looks like? Like, how does it happen? Like, is it skimming? Is it not paying overtime? Like, what does it mean?
¿Qué pasa? ¿Me puedes describir cómo es el robo de salario para ti o para otros trabajadores? ¿Qué es lo que pasa? O sea, nomás les quitan menos dinero, no pagan taxas,
No, definitivamente no les pagan.
They just don't these wages, but also in what was mentioned earlier here with labor trafficking, because folks are then told to be quiet and coerced into staying quiet by threat of immigration, or sometimes even by threat of violence. I don't know if folks are following, but July 15th, there's going to be a hearing where a man is accused. His name is Ricardo Batres. He's being accused of wage theft and exploiting workers, and with things that I just described. And I'm not sure exactly what time his hearing is going to be held, but I do know it's July 15th, and you can look for it more. The man's name was Ricardo Batres, and he was one of those folks who was exploiting workers, and that's what he is accused of, I should say, right? But anyways, the point is that this happens like regularly in the industry where workers are just told to just stay quiet, or you're going to work for me for less, because if you don't, then I know people who work in immigration, and they're going to come pick you up. We see that happening in the industry, and so it's not just blatant, just not paying for your wages, but it's also coercion and exploitation.
Is that trial in Minneapolis or is it?
It's in Minneapolis. Well, actually, yes, I think it's in Minneapolis, but I think Hennepin County is the one that's handling it.
Thank you.
Two quick points on how our organization responds to like challenging white supremacy. Number one, before we were preparing all of our members to do housing work and anti-foreclosure work, we did a whole bunch of house gatherings and screenings of Race, Power of an Illusion, and the section that really dealt with the construction of the suburbs along racially segregated lines after World War II. And we did these in the suburbs with our members who lived in the suburbs. And some of them, as Jews back right after World War II, could not have moved in, but now they could move in and they could benefit from that segregated system. So we made sure that our members, before going in to do affordable or equitable housing work, like we're actually being challenged and educated about some of the structural roots of the system as it stands today. And the second thing is responding. My favorite meeting today, it's close because my meeting with you, Mikhail, was up there, but my favorite meeting of the day was the head of the Al Wood Center, a worker center that's organizing Amazon workers. He said, okay, we need some help. We're preparing for a major job action soon, and we need some help to reach the white Amazon workers that we haven't focused on yet. We focused on Somali Amazon workers, and so we don't have time to deal with everybody, but can you just get some folks out to do house visits for a bunch of shifts and phone banks to reach the white Amazon workers? We're not prepared to do that. We don't have any grant funding to do that. We don't have any staff to do that. He wants it now. Like, can you come tomorrow? And part of sometimes like working for racial justice is saying, okay, I'm gonna drop the thing that I thought I was gonna be doing, and I'm gonna help to train and supervise and go out and do a bunch of house visits to these white Amazon workers to invite them into the process that the Somali workers have started in challenging Amazon. So showing up sometimes too.
We have time for one more, so.
Let's come to furthest.
Thank you. I'm actually visiting from Seattle. I'm an officer in my local of the American Postal Workers Union, which, by the way, my local has the majority executive board of people of color. And I'm also a delegate to the Martin Luther King County Labor Council in Seattle. And what I've seen of the housing, we've had so much discussion in Seattle because it's such a pressure cooker. All these high-tech jobs are coming in, people being priced out of the market. And I've seen, small, cute, affordable houses knocked down, replaced by mansions. Apartments are systematically being gutted and rehabbed into expensive, high-rent places, or just knocked down, replaced by high-rent apartments. And so there's been a lot of political debate about that. One thing that I think is, my conclusion from what I've seen is that the for-profit housing market doesn't work, at least in Seattle, to provide good housing. And you have to try and find a way around that. There have been proposals to do public housing in Seattle, or publicly financed housing, or publicly regulated development, which, and to do like a public sort of bank to sort of finance these things. But the power of investors, well, first of all, back up a little. There are some people who say that housing is human right? And those are not the people in charge of our housing system. It's investment bankers and developers and those sorts of people. And you've got to understand, that to really try and figure out ways to get around that and start nudging that system aside. I think it's great you're having this discussion tonight. I also think we should ponder who our president is. A dishonest real estate developer who stole from his workers, stole from his suppliers. That's where our president is now. That's the kind of political power they have, right? And so I just wish you well in your efforts here.
So I'm going to just take the last word for this part, and I want to encourage you all to stay and talk and eat cookies. Don't stay and talk. So, first I want to look back for a quick second. 2 weeks ago, Jelani Cobb was here and insisted that there was a connection between what had happened to formerly enslaved people during and after Reconstruction and what is happening to immigrants now. Tonight, between what Metric has shared with us about enslaved Africans and their position in American society, and what Humberto has shared with us about wage theft, that Africans got to work for free for hundreds of years. Now immigrants get to work for free. You know, there's a very important connection for us to be paying attention to, which has been identified as both white supremacy and capitalism, and we need to understand our particular history. I also want to especially thank Jigme. There's nothing that makes a historian happier than somebody else giving the right history lesson. So that's great. But I do also want to look ahead for a hot minute to say that we do have these films coming up. The first one, Sold Out, is the story of Richfield and the gentrification, thank you. And there are lots of flyers on the counter. Take them and encourage other people to come. Then we're going to show Jim Crow in the North, which tells the story of restrictive covenants and the ways that those suburbs were transformed but continue to be white spaces. And then we're going to see what I think is this absolutely remarkable new documentary film, Detroit 48202, where an African-American letter carrier takes the camera person through his neighborhood, interviewing people whose mail he has delivered for years about what has happened to them since the auto plants have closed and the decent paying jobs have gone away. So please come back, encourage other people to come. I also want to say I really heard tonight about how the struggle for wages and the struggle for housing are interconnected struggles. And I think that we have to keep bringing the organizations together and figuring out how we can push both of those things simultaneously. I remember 2 summers ago, we were reading Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted, and mostly with a group of people from the St. Paul Federation of Teachers. And Desmond's kind of scary conclusion was that you might get $15 an hour, and immediately the property owners were going to raise the rent and raise the mortgages. And until you figured out how to tackle housing as well as wages, people were going to continue to be left behind. So I think it's a very important set of lessons, and I really appreciate it. Can we show some love for the... Cookies are in the back. Thank you. Oh, and if you didn't sign the guest book, please sign the guest book so we can stay in touch.
Are you an organizer or is it just because it's